Good morning, everyone. I hope you were able to sleep last night, although I know that's sometimes hard in a new place, in a new bed. So you can catch up on your sleep during the teachings. I'm joking. But it does happen. And it's best avoided if you can. So, especially if you snore. So as usual, we'll start with some prayers. So feel free to follow along, or do your own prayers, your own contemplation. The purpose is to get into a good state of mind for what we're going to be doing this morning.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one done to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans too, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure body's form supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path of freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field, endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the fall of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewed Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the
let's take a few more minutes to do our best to generate a positive motivation for being here, an altruistic motivation. So see if you can feel how nice it would be, how wonderful it would be, how fantastic it would be if everyone, all people and all beings everywhere, could be free of all different kinds of suffering and problems. Nobody had to suffer. And the kind of flip side of that is wishing all living beings to be happy. Try to feel how wonderful it would be if everyone, every human being, every living being could have every kind of happiness, pure happiness, not happiness that comes from doing harmful things, but genuine happiness deep down inside. So even if you can just feel a little trace of those feelings, then see if you can connect that with what we're doing here. So here we're gathered to learn more about the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, and meditate on them, deepen our understanding of them. So see if you can feel you're doing this not just for your own happiness, well-being, freedom from problems and suffering, but so that you can bring that to others and be able to help other people and other beings to also have less suffering and greater happiness. And if you're comfortable with the idea of attaining enlightenment, awakening, like the Buddha did, then you can bring that in as well as a long-term goal, becoming enlightened so that you can help all other beings in the best possible way. So this morning, I'd like to start talking about the three principal aspects of the path, which is the main teaching topic of this year's retreat. And if you have questions about purification and Vajrasattva practice, there's a question and answer session this afternoon, 2:30? 2 o'clock, okay, 2 o'clock this afternoon. There's a couple of the monastics will be available to answer questions. And also, when I come in the afternoon, I think my talk in the afternoon is at 4:30, so I'll also give you a chance to ask questions. And if you want to be anonymous, you can write them on bits of paper. I think there's some paper out in the back next to the microwave, somewhere over there. So you can write your questions and then leave them on the table here. So we're spending time in this retreat doing the practice of purification, which is a really good thing to do, a really great practice. But that alone isn't enough to fully transform our mind and bring our mind to higher and higher states, up to awakening, which is like the highest, most long-term goal in Buddhism. We need more than just purification, although purification is one of the practices we need to do. But it's good to have more understanding of the path. Purification is just like one aspect of a path to enlightenment. And so if we understand more about the path, that will help us understand the place of purification, and the context, why we do it, and give us more energy and enthusiasm to do it, in case that's kind of lagging. And so, so I thought to teach this little text. It's good if everyone could have a copy of the Blue Prayer Book. It's in that. So here in the Abbey, we have a tradition that after lunch every day we recite a different text, short text. And so this is one of the texts that we recite, and it happens to be Saturday, which is today. So we'll be reciting that after lunch today. It's on page 31 of at least this version of the book. I don't know, are there different versions of this prayer book or half different? Page 31. So I think most people here have memorized this text and are able to recite it by heart. And that's a good thing to do. In the Tibetan tradition, probably most Buddhist traditions, monks and nuns usually memorize texts, and not just little ones like this, but texts that are hundreds of pages long, and they memorize multiple of those. And that's a really good thing to do, because then you've got the words of the Buddha, the words of the great masters stored in your mind. And that's useful if you happen to become blind one day and you can't read anymore. You got those in your mind. Or what happened in Tibet, it was taken over by the Chinese communists, and they took away all the books and burned them, and nobody was allowed to read books for a while. But those who had memorized the text, they could, they still had them up in their minds, and they could continue silently going through them and meditating on them. Anyway, so it's good to, if you can, learn things by heart. So this text, it's written by Lama Tsongkhapa, who is the founder of the Gelug tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. That's the one that we follow, the tradition the Dalai Lama follows. He lived in about 14th, 15th centuries, and he was a great yogi, great, brilliant mind. I mean, from the time he was a child, he just showed incredible intelligence and interest in the Dharma, became a monk, and then yeah, studied and like really quickly gained incredible knowledge of the scriptures that he was studying, and even started writing his own texts and became a famous teacher. So he was a great scholar, but also a meditator. He was a yogi. He spent a lot of time living in remote places, very kind of simple conditions, and meditated, did a lot of meditation, did also a lot of purification practice and accumulation of merit, because those are like complementary practices to grow our wisdom and our good qualities. So anyway, he was quite an amazing being. And he wrote a number of texts on what we call the Lamrim. Lamrim means the stages of the path, and this means the path to enlightenment. And there was already some tradition of this kind in India, and then it came to Tibet and was really developed in Tibet. The idea behind the Lamrim is the Buddha gave a huge amount of teachings. He gave lots and lots, thousands, maybe millions of teachings. And he would teach according to whoever was in front of him. Yeah, so what kind of person was there, what needs they had, what aptitudes they had. He would give teachings according to them. And so if you just read through the Buddha's teachings, they can be a little varied, and it can be hard to figure out, well, what about me? How should I practice? So the Lamrim tradition, the masters who developed that, they studied the Buddhist scriptures. They were thoroughly familiar with the Buddhist scriptures, and they took out the most important points and arranged them in a kind of step-by-step manner, showing us what we need to do to get from where we are now as ordinary, confused, unenlightened beings to our goal of enlightenment, Buddhahood. So it's kind of like the steps of the path, the stages of the path, a bit like Google Maps. When you want to get from here to Chicago, maybe, and you're driving, yeah, it's good to have it all laid out, where you go first, and then you turn here, and then you get onto that freeway, and then you da-da-da-da-da. It's a bit like that. So it's quite convenient, a guide to enlightenment. And Lama Tsongkhapa himself wrote a number of texts on this, in this genre of teachings, the Lamrim. His biggest one is called the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. And there's an English translation of that in 3 volumes. So it's pretty, a lot of material there. And he wrote a shorter one called Middle Length Treatise on the Path to Enlightenment. We're actually studying that here every Thursday morning. And there's a shorter one as well. And then there's this one, which is probably the shortest Lamrim text. And in this text, he focuses on the 3 most important topics that we need to learn about and reflect on, meditate on, and get experience of if we want to follow this path and eventually reach enlightenment. So I thought, since in this retreat we have like 4 or 5 days, that would be a good amount of time to go through this and just get a stronger sense of this topic. Now, the Lamrim itself isn't really kind of like an ABC of Buddhism. It isn't like a Buddhism for dummies kind of thing, for people who are brand new and don't know anything about Buddhism. Lamrim is actually, it kind of assumes you already have a good understanding of the basic Buddhist teachings and you're ready to practice them. Because that's how it was in Tibet. I mean, I don't know if anyone ever did a census, but probably 99% of the people in Tibet were Buddhist and grew up in a Buddhist surrounding. Their family, everybody around them was Buddhist. They were exposed to Buddhism since they were little babies. And so, yeah, it was just kind of assumed that they would be Buddhist as well, and they learned a lot as they were growing up. But not the case for most of us. Most of us are raised in maybe other kinds of religions, Christianity or Judaism, or no religion at all, completely, I don't know, materialist, atheist, scientific. And so then we come to Buddhism when we're already adults or maybe teenagers. But, you know, we have a lot of other knowledge and experiences before that. And so it's all new for us. And so the Dalai Lama recommends that when we're starting to learn about Buddhism, a good place to start is the Four Truths. So I'm just going to briefly explain those. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those, but I'll just briefly explain those before we go into this text. So this is the very first thing the Buddha taught after he became enlightened and started teaching. This first teaching included an explanation of the Four Truths. So it's and you can say that everything the Buddha taught can be summarized in these Four Truths. So it's kind of a handy way of explaining the essence of Buddhism, although it's also very profound. And so we shouldn't think, oh yeah, I know all about the Four Truths, I want to hear something else. Because each time we hear about it or read about it or think about it, our understanding goes deeper and deeper. And we probably don't really fully understand the Four Noble Truths until we're already enlightened. And then we can say, now I understand the Four Truths. But until then, we probably have more things we need to learn. So the Four Truths are, the first one, it's usually translated as suffering, but that term isn't really so good. It's not such an accurate translation of the Pali and Sanskrit terms dukkha. Dukkha is the term that's used in Pali and Sanskrit. And the meaning of dukkha is more, it's better to say something like unsatisfactoriness. Unsatisfactoriness. So it refers to any experience that we have which is not completely great, not complete happiness. Yeah, because the word suffering usually connotes something really bad, really horrible, you know, like living in Gaza right now, or in Ukraine, or having cancer, having a lot of pain. But dukkha includes much more than that. It includes even our like normal everyday aches and pains and irritations and disturbances. Yeah, so even just minor experiences that are unpleasant or unsatisfactory or not completely great, those are included in dukkha. So Venerable Chödrön uses the word dukkha, and I think, yeah, here everyone gets used to that term. Or if you want an English word, then unsatisfactoriness would be better, although it's kind of long. But just understand that, yeah, what Buddha was talking about wasn't just really heavy, horrible sufferings, but even the small physical and mental discomforts and unpleasantness that we experience. So what the Buddha was trying to point out was that as long as we are ordinary beings, yeah, we haven't reached enlightenment, we haven't reached nirvana, then we are subject to these unpleasant experiences. It's just a fact of life. It's just the reality of our situation. And people sometimes say Buddhism is pessimistic because of all this talk of suffering. But it's realistic. A lot of people don't want to look at suffering. I was like that before I started learning Buddhism. I was kind of in denial trying to think that life was wonderful, life is rosy, everything is wonderful, I don't have any problems. And that was a complete lie. I had a lot of problems. And so that doesn't help. If you do have problems, if you do have suffering, and you just try to ignore them, deny them, pretend they're not there, that isn't a solution. They're not going to go away. They're still going to be there, and they could get worse. Whereas if we get realistic and acknowledge the existence, the fact of suffering and unsatisfactoriness, then we can start doing something about it. And that was why the Buddha spoke about this first. And Buddhism is not at all pessimistic. It's actually very optimistic, because then the Buddha went on to explain how to get out of suffering, the solution. So the second truth is the truth of the origins or causes of suffering, of dukkha. Where does it come from? Why do we have it? Why can't we go through life and everything is wonderful and perfect and rosy and we never have any problems? It's nobody's fault. We can't point our finger at anybody, although we try to sometimes, to put the blame on other people. Like parents, that's a popular object to blame our problems on. Poor mom and dad. That no, it's no one person's fault, but rather it lies within our mind, factors within our mind. So the Buddha discovered this on his own through his practice of meditation, looking into his mind, looking into his experience. What he discovered was within the mind there are what are called afflictions or delusions. These are aspects of the mind that don't see things correctly, that aren't in accordance with reality. They actually see things in a distorted way, and they disturb our mind. That's kind of the criteria of an affliction. It's something that disturbs the mind. It causes the mind to be disturbed and unpeaceful. And so the main examples of these afflictions are what are called three poisonous states of mind. One is anger or hatred or hostility. That's probably the most harmful, disturbing aspect of the mind that anyone could ever have. It strongly disturbs our own mind, and then it usually also spills over and disturbs other people as well. Even if we try to keep our mouth shut and don't say anything, but just the energy we put out, yeah, people can know, oh, this person's angry, be careful. And then, of course, it leads to horrific things like war and violence and murder, abuse. Yeah, so much suffering comes as a result of anger. And we all have it, even if we manage to always look calm and composed. But, if we're honest with what's going on in our mind, we probably all have feelings of irritation and annoyance and aversion and dislike. Oh, that person, I can't stand the way they talk, the way they dress, the way they look. Oh, I just want to get away from that person. So, yeah, these kind of thoughts and feelings arise in our mind. They're probably happening right here. You're with a bunch of people you haven't met before, and you probably find certain people you find annoying or irritating, or you just want to stay away from. So those are forms of anger as well, even if they're low level and they're not really creating any problems for anybody else, but they are disturbing, right? If you ask yourself, are these nice thoughts to have? Do these make me happy? Are these peaceful and beautiful thoughts? Then I think we have to admit they are not. They're very unpleasant and disturbing. So that's one example of an affliction, and others are greed, and that also has varying degrees, just, liking something and wanting more of it. Attachment, desire, lust, So again, there's varying degrees of that state of mind. And that one is very difficult. They say it's hard to disengage ourselves. We get attached to people, we get attached to things and want them. And even if we can see that this state of mind is not so healthy, it's very hard to, to let go of attachment. And then there's jealousy and arrogance and what's another one? Pride. Pride is arrogance. Yeah, arrogance and pride, that's the same one. Doubt, yeah, doubt. Well, doubt isn't necessarily always afflictive because the Buddha, when he was teaching, encouraged people to think for themselves. He didn't want people to just blindly believe what he was saying, like some religions do. They just say, this is the truth, you must believe it, otherwise. So the Buddha wasn't like that. He said, think about what I'm saying. Check, use your own experience, your own understanding, looking at your own experience, looking at the world. And yeah, use your own discriminating intelligence to determine if what I'm saying is true or not. So he very much encouraged people to question and doubt. That kind of doubt is healthy, yeah? To think, is this true or not? I'm going to check it out. But there's an unhealthy kind of doubt if it's very strong and it's kind of leading us away from something healthy and wholesome. For example, karma, the teachings on karma, which are really, really important in Buddhism, because basically everything we're doing is creating the causes for our own future experiences. So we are the creators of our experience. So some people can accept that, but some people can't. They think, no way, no such thing as karma. Things just happen by chance, random, And so if you have strong doubt about karma, such that you're kind of moving away from it, not towards it, and inclined towards just rejecting the whole idea, thinking it's total nonsense, that kind of doubt is an affliction, because then you won't even try to create good karma and avoid bad karma, because you think, oh, it doesn't matter what I do, whatever I do, it's okay, as long as I get away with it, don't get caught by the police, something like that. So some doubt is afflictive, harmful. Anyway, there's a number of these afflictions we have in our mind, and the Buddha discovered those are the main source of suffering. And actually, the big one, the number one affliction, is ignorance or confusion. And that means not seeing things as they are, mistaken view of everything, including our own self, I, me. We have a sense of I that we think is true and real, but normally we don't investigate it. But if we do, then it starts to seem a little murky and not really sure what this I is. So Buddha said we have a mistaken sense of our own self, our own I, which is kind of at the center of our whole experience. The way in which we view others and the world is all based on our sense of I, myself, me. And then we also see others and the world and everything in ways that are not accurate, not in accordance with reality. So that's what we call ignorance. And that's the root, the main cause of all afflictions. We're just not seeing things correctly. And then based on that, based on inaccurate perceptions and conceptions of things, then all these other afflictions arise. We get angry at some people, we have attachment for other people, and so on and so forth. So this whole web of afflictions and confusion is all based on mistaken ways of seeing things. And then another main cause of suffering or dukkha is karma. So under the influence of afflictions, when we act, we do actions, especially unwholesome negative actions, like killing, stealing, and so forth, things we're trying to avoid here, then those actions leave imprints on our mind, kind of like seeds. And if we don't purify them, we can purify them, but if we don't, like probably most people in the world never do any purification, then they just stay there in the mind, and then sometime in the future, when the right causes and conditions come together, those seeds will ripen in the form of experiences we have, whether negative actions, non-virtuous actions bring about suffering, problems, bad things. Virtuous, positive actions are the cause of good experiences, happiness. So this is what the Buddha discovered in his own experience, looking at his own mind and really opening up his mind. He was also able to see his past lives. He could remember his past lives, and he could see the connection between things that he did at an earlier time and then the experiences he had later. So he discovered karma through his own insight into his mind, into his experiences. And so this discovery, or this realization, enabled him to free himself from all the afflictions and karma. And that means he freed himself from suffering and the causes of suffering. And the third of the four truths is called cessation, meaning the complete stopping or elimination of suffering and the causes of suffering. And that's what the Buddha was able to do. He experienced that himself, that's possible, that suffering and the causes of suffering are not permanent fixtures in our mind. They are temporary, they are transitory, and they can be cleared away, they can be removed. There are antidotes to them that can get rid of them. So just the fact that that is a possibility, and it's not just certain special people who can do that, but everybody can do it. Anybody who wants to can do it. It's possible for anyone who has a mind. Every being that has a mind is able to free their minds from all suffering and its causes. So that's the meaning of the third truth. And then the fourth truth is called the path, the truth of the path. And that means how to do it, what one needs to do in order to achieve that state of cessation. So probably most of the Buddha's teachings fit into the fourth truth, the path. So he spent a lot of time explaining what we need to do to free ourselves from suffering and its causes and achieve genuine peace and happiness. And there's different ways of explaining the path. One way is this teaching on the Lamrim, the path to enlightenment. And since we have a short amount of time here, it's good to have a short text on this path. Okay, so the three principal aspects of the path are the first one is sometimes it's called renunciation, but that term can be a little off-putting to some people. It can sound like you have to give up your pleasure or your happiness. You can't be happy. But another way of explaining it is the determination to be free. That sounds a little more inviting, doesn't it? Yeah. I want to be free. Yes, freedom. So basically it means, yeah, the wish or the determination to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Yeah. So that's the first of the three. And the second is bodhicitta, which we usually use the Sanskrit term. It's hard to find a good English translation, but it refers to the aspiration to reach full enlightenment, Buddhahood, to become a Buddha, out of compassion and love for all living beings, the wish to help all living beings. So not just thinking about me, I want to get myself free of suffering and achieve happiness and peace, but I want to help everyone else do that as well. And the way to do that is to become a Buddha. So that's what we mean by bodhicitta. And then the third of the three is called the correct view, but it refers to the wisdom that understands the true nature of things, what we normally call emptiness. Although that term can be a little misleading, but we'll get to that eventually. And that is the main thing we need to develop if we want to free ourselves from suffering and the causes of suffering. So the afflictions in our mind, as I said, they're rooted in ignorance about the true nature of things. That's the main problem we have. We just don't see things correctly. So the correct view is understanding how things do exist. Yeah. And it isn't just like an intellectual understanding. That's not too difficult to come to, but it needs to be an actual experience, a kind of direct realization, a direct experience of the true nature of things. And once you develop that, that is the thing that cuts through ignorance and the other afflictions, eliminates all those afflictions in the mind. So that's really important. So we'll go through the text, and there's verses in the text that explain each of these three, and you'll have the chance to meditate on them as well during the meditation sessions while you're here. And before getting into the text, usually when Lamrim teachings are given, the teacher gives advice to the students about how to listen, as if we didn't know. But there are things that can happen while we're listening to teachings that we should try to avoid. And so there are these three faults of listening that we should try to avoid while we are listening to teachings, because ideally we have the attitude that the teachings are very, very precious. Learning about the path to enlightenment, this is the most important thing that we could ever listen to, because this is like the key to be free of our suffering, all of our problems, and also be able to help others do the same, help others be free of their suffering and problems. So what could be more important, more precious than that? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of wonderful information available, wonderful topics we can learn about that, enable us to do all kinds of things, but nothing compared to this, really. So, yeah, it is incredibly precious. And so when we do have the chance to learn about these teachings of the path to enlightenment, it's good to try to do it in the best way. So the best way, the ideal way, is to be free of three faults. The first fault is not paying attention. So they explain these three faults using the analogy of a vessel. Like, let's say you have some really nice, somebody is giving out some nice liquid, Coca-Cola or chai or something you like, something you would like to drink. And so you need a vessel, like a cup, to put it in. But there's potential problems. One is if the cup is turned upside down. Okay, if it's upside down, nothing will go in. So not paying attention to teachings is like being an upside down vessel. There's all of this advice coming, these wonderful ideas, wonderful teachings coming to you. But if you're not paying attention, then it's like your mind is like an upside down cup. Nothing will go in. Okay? And so this can happen because of various causes. One is a distraction. Yeah, you're thinking about other things while you're sitting here. And that's very difficult to avoid. You know, especially you just got here yesterday or the day before, and so you're probably still thinking about what you did last week and conversations you had and arguments you had and things that happened to you and so on and so forth. Or maybe you're thinking about next week when you go back home and what you're going to do when you get back home. So it's very hard to stop those kinds of thoughts because this is the way our mind normally works. It's thinking a lot. But at least try to notice when it's happening, and when your mind does get distracted and is thinking of other things rather than what you're doing right here, then just say, no, not now, later, and come back to the present. Try to have a sense that what's going on here is important and that you really should focus on it. And another problem is sleepiness. So when you're falling asleep, then again, you're not really able to take in the teachings. So try to stay awake. And a good way to ensure that is to keep your eyes open. I mean, we might think, oh, I want to meditate on this teaching, but in the next minute, I mean, that still happens to me. So it's very hard to avoid it. And so if you notice you're feeling sleepy or you're falling asleep, open your eyes, keep them open, and don't look around the room because then you'll get distracted. So just, focus on some point in the room and stay focused on that. Or some of you are writing notes. That's also a helpful way to pay attention in a way, because you're writing down the things that you're hearing, and that way you'll be more easily able to remember them later. So yeah, try to stay awake. Also, keeping your back straight, sitting up straight is helpful. If you kind of slouch, then it's also easy to fall asleep. So try to pay attention and avoid that fault of not paying attention. And the second fault is having negative thoughts in our mind, or a negative motivation, negative intentions in our mind. And this is compared to a dirty vessel. So your cup might be right side up, but if it's full of muck and dirt, then whatever goes into it is going to get contaminated, not worthy, not fit to drink. And so similarly, the teachings are very precious, very beneficial. But if our mind has negative thoughts, and that can be all kinds of negative thoughts, like maybe we're having critical thoughts towards the people around us or towards the person giving the teachings, finding faults with them, picking out faults in them. Another one is being highly selfish, very, very selfish. We're all selfish to a certain extent, but selfishness is also not an ideal attitude for listening to the Dharma, and especially if you're just thinking in a worldly sense, I want to get these teachings and then use them just for myself, and I'm not going to share them with anybody else, and maybe I can write books and make a lot of money, or become a motivational speaker and go on TED Talks and become famous. I mean, this does happen, don't so be careful. Those kinds of thoughts, those are worldly, very worldly, very mundane, very ego-centered, very self-centered. So beware of thoughts like that. Don't let your mind go down those roads. The ideal motivation to have is to, want to improve yourself, want to transform yourself, be a better person, and be more helpful to others. Okay, so that's why in the beginning we always try to generate altruistic motivation for why we're here, why we're listening. So keep going back to that and not let your mind get carried away in selfish, egotistical, worldly thoughts while you're here. And then the third fault is not remembering afterwards. So we have this expression, in one ear and out the other, you know that one? So you might be paying attention during the talk and have a good motivation, but then afterwards you can't remember anything that was said. Oh yeah, it was great, but I can't remember. What did she say about that? So being a leaky sieve. Yeah, so that's like, yeah, they say like a leaky vessel. So if you have a vessel, but it's got like cracks and holes in it, whatever goes in is just going to leak out. And so that's, again, a good reason for taking notes. If you have paper, notebooks, write down things, or at least try to, one thing you can do is like after a talk, just try to remember, go over in your mind at least some of the points that were made, some of the important points that were made, and not just lose them completely. So, if possible, try your best to pay attention, to keep your mind free of negative, afflictive thoughts, and remember what you learned afterwards. Now we have recordings as well, so you can always go back and listen to the recording. Okay, so let's start going through this little text. So it starts with a homage. This is traditional in Buddhist texts. It says, I bow down to the venerable spiritual mentors. So that means spiritual teachers, sometimes called gurus, lamas. Spiritual mentor is a teacher that teaches us spiritual teachings and also guides us on the path. And this is a really important topic in Buddhism, having a spiritual teacher and how you relate to spiritual teachers. So just briefly, even though we can learn a lot from books, reading books on our own, and internet, there's so much you could learn on the internet, YouTube videos and courses, correspondence courses, online courses, and so on. So you can gain a lot of knowledge from those sources. But if you don't have a living teacher or teachers, you don't have to just stick to one teacher, you can have multiple teachers. But without having contact with living teachers that you can sit together with in the presence of and listen to their explanations and also observe how they behave, then you're missing out on certain aspects of Buddhist teachings. I mean, through reading on your own, learning on your own, you can get some intellectual understanding, intellectual knowledge, but we need more than that. We need to know how to live the Dharma, how to live the teachings in our life. And you can only get that by, physical presence, the physical presence of the teachers who ideally, and this is another thing, we have to be careful when it comes to teachers. There's advice on what qualities to look for in a teacher. We shouldn't just take anybody as a teacher because unfortunately there are people who put themselves in the position of being teachers, but they're not really qualified, and their motivation is not really the correct one. They might, like I was just saying, wanting to become rich and famous. And so we shouldn't just take anyone as a teacher, but we should carefully get to know the person, observe them in different situations, and just check if they walk their talk. Yeah, because it's not so difficult to gain knowledge of Buddhism and then be very eloquent and charismatic and appear like you're a great teacher. But then if you see that person in other situations, they're not living according to what they're teaching, then I even heard a story, I think in the Tibetan tradition, of some teacher who was fantastic when it came to teachings, but then the disciples would see that person behaving very differently in other contexts, and they asked the teacher, and the teacher said, "Do what I say, don't do what I do." So, but that's not so helpful. It's helpful if you can see the teacher acting according to what they're teaching. If they talk about compassion, the importance of compassion and love, and then you see them being compassionate and being loving, especially towards you. You can really feel that compassion, that love. And then it's like, oh, this is real. This isn't just a word in a book in my head, but this is a real thing. So that's very inspiring and very helpful as well. We need living examples of the teachings to show that it is possible, it's doable. I can do it too. I can be like that too. So so this is an important topic, but it's also one we need to be careful of. And so what some teachers say is, you can get to know different teachers, listen to their teachings, spend time getting to know them, observing them in different situations. And while doing that, you're learning the Dharma, and you can start practicing the Dharma, but you don't need to rush into making a decision. This is my teacher, this is my guru. That could be a little tricky. Because again, a teacher might be very charismatic and know a lot and be able to give incredible teachings, and you think, oh, this person must be my teacher, this person must be enlightened, but not necessarily. So there are sad stories about people getting led by teachers and then later finding out they were like charlatans. What's that expression, Venerable? Charlatananda. Charlatan. Yeah. So, and once that happens, you can become totally disillusioned. I once met a woman she came to one of my courses, and she told me she and her husband had gotten involved with some spiritual teacher early on, back in the maybe 70s, and then after some time, they found out this person was addicted to drugs and was doing all kinds of unwholesome things, and they just got totally disillusioned, and they didn't want to have anything more to do with any spiritual teacher, any spiritual tradition for something like 10 or 15 years. And this was her very first time, trying it again. Her husband was still, no, never, never, never. But she was thinking, well, maybe some teachers are okay. So she was trying again. But that's really sad if people just get totally turned off, totally disillusioned, and then never want to follow a spiritual path again. So we don't want that to happen. And so it is important to be cautious and careful. And one of the most important qualities to look for in a teacher is ethics, having good ethical conduct, meaning that they are keeping the precepts, at the very least, the 5 precepts that we've been talking about here. And then we also have, in Buddhism, we have monastic precepts where you have different levels. You take more and more precepts as you go along. And so whatever precepts the person has taken, that they are really living according to those, to the best of their ability, at least the most important precepts. They're not breaking them. And again, there's sad stories about even monks behaving abusively, sexual abuse and so on, power abuse. And so again, this can be so disheartening and disillusioning for people, especially if you are on the receiving end of that. But even if you just hear about that, it can make you feel, oh, I don't want to trust anybody with robes that are going to abuse me. So yeah, I'm sure it's only a few who do that. I'm sure it's not the majority, but still we do need to be careful. And yeah, just check to see if the person is living ethically, the way they're behaving. Okay, so it is important to have spiritual teachers and then to have respect for them, have a respectful attitude towards them, because they are instrumental, they're essential, vital to our spiritual practice, our spiritual development, and our ability to attain higher states of mind. I say there's nobody who ever attained enlightenment without relying on spiritual teachers. You just can't do it on your own. You can get a certain way along the way, but not all the way. So we do need them, but we need to have the proper understanding, knowledge, and way of behaving with them. Okay, then the first verse, number 1, says, I will explain as well as I am able the essence of all the teachings of the conqueror, the path praised by the conquerors and their spiritual children, the entrance for the fortunate one, or the entrance for the fortunate ones who desire liberation. So the term conquerors is another term for Buddha, because a Buddha is someone who has conquered all the afflictions in the mind, has gained victory over the afflictions and is free of them. So this verse is called Promise to Compose, and it's a tradition in Buddhist literature, scriptures, that there's always a verse like this at the beginning where the author is promising, or, saying what they're going to do. We have a similar tradition when in English, when writing a book, you usually have a preface or an introduction or both, where the author is kind of laying out, the background, why I wrote this book, what this book is all about, and so on. And then, so that's, the first line is just saying, I will explain. And then the three principal aspects of the path are also included in this verse, but not using the normal terminology. So when it says the essence of all the teachings of the conqueror, that refers to renunciation, the first of the three principal aspects of the path. So, I mean, you could say that about lots of other things that the Buddha taught, but yeah, I think the Buddha himself often said, what I teach is the path to liberation, something like that. That really was his main message, what he was trying to convey, what he was trying to get people to understand, that you don't have to suffer. You can be free of suffering. There is a way to be free of suffering, a path to be free of suffering, and I'm going to teach you that. Okay, so that is the essence of his teachings, how to free yourself from all suffering and causes of suffering. Then the next phrase says, the path praised by the conquerors and their spiritual children. So the term spiritual children refers to bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are those who want to follow in the footsteps of the Buddha and attain what the Buddha attained, that state of enlightenment. And so they have bodhicitta. They develop bodhicitta, this aspiration to become fully enlightened, fully awakened, in order to benefit all other beings. And so that phrase refers to the second of the three principal aspects of the path, bodhicitta. Bodhicitta isn't something that just comes up spontaneously in some people's minds, but it's something that we develop. So there's teachings on how to develop bodhicitta. We'll be going through some of those. So any of us, every one of us, any of us who wants to, can develop bodhicitta and become a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is someone determined to follow the path and become enlightened out of love and compassion for all other beings. They want to help all beings, and they see that the best way to help them is to develop themselves to the state of enlightenment. So the path praised by the conquerors and their spiritual children, that refers to bodhicitta. And then the third phrase, the entrance for the fortunate ones who desire liberation, that refers to the third principal aspect of the path, the correct view, or also called the wisdom of emptiness. And so, because it's not possible to even liberate oneself from suffering and its causes, much less help others do the same, unless you have that wisdom that understands reality, the true nature of things. That really is like the antidote to the afflictions, the key that will enable us to get out of the prison of our miserable situation that we're in, unenlightened existence. So that's why it's called here the entrance for the fortunate ones who desire liberation. Anyone who's fortunate enough to know there's such a thing as liberation and wants to attain it, this is the most important thing. So whether you just want to liberate yourself from suffering, or you want to become a Buddha, fully enlightened, and help everyone else be free of suffering, you must develop that wisdom, which is the third of the three principal aspects of the path. Then, next verse says, listen with clear minds, you fortunate ones, who direct your minds to the path pleasing to the Buddha, and strive to make good use of freedom and fortune without being attached to the joys of cyclic existence. So listen with clear minds. You can remember those three types of vessels we should try to avoid: the upside down one, not paying attention; the dirty one, having negative thoughts; and the leaky one, in one ear and out the other. So try to keep our minds clear and open and pure as much as possible, and attentive. And then he says, you fortunate ones. So yeah, we are fortunate in that we have this opportunity to learn these teachings. And there's one of the first topics, he does mention it, it will come later. One of the first topics in the Lamrim that we learn about and meditate on is what's called the precious human life, or sometimes called precious human rebirth. And so even though every person and every living being has the potential to free themselves from suffering and attain liberation and enlightenment, everybody can do it. Even animals, even insects, they have that potential, because it's just right there in the mind. Any mind, any being's mind has within it certain qualities, certain aspects that can be developed and brought to fulfillment, and then that mind can become enlightened mind. So every being has that potential. That's what's called Buddha nature. But unfortunately, not every being is in the most ideal situation to be able to learn that they have that potential and do the things that need to be done to develop that potential. So most beings, in fact, the vast majority of sentient beings aren't in the most ideal situation. Some of them have too much suffering. Yeah, they're just in a situation where there's just enormous suffering and they're just totally absorbed in suffering. Some of them have too much pleasure. So having too much pleasure is also not an ideal situation, because then you're just like totally distracted all the time with all these wonderful things you're doing and experiencing, and you have no interest at all in doing anything spiritual. So as human beings, not all human beings have the most ideal conditions, but a certain portion of human beings have what's called the precious human life, precious human rebirth. And this is kind of in the middle between those other two. We have a certain amount of suffering, but not too much that would prevent us from being able to listen to teachings and practice them. And we have a certain amount of pleasure, so that we know there is such a thing as pleasure and happiness, but probably not as much as we would like. And so we yearn for more pleasure, more happiness. And the suffering we do experience, even though it's not so overwhelming, gives us a sense of, yeah, I want to be free of suffering. I don't want any more suffering, and I want happiness. And so this is kind of an ideal situation to give rise to an interest in spiritual practice. Yeah. So when we do have the opportunity to hear spiritual teachings, learn spiritual teachings, our mind is kind of hungry, ready, ripe for them. So that's the basic meaning of a precious human life, precious human rebirth, is having a human life. And we also need a healthy body and a healthy mind, because if our body is, subject to certain ailments or disabilities, that could make it very difficult for us to learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma. Although nowadays there's a lot more opportunities for that. Like in Tibet, they would say if you were blind and deaf, then you wouldn't be able to learn the Dharma. They didn't have any facilities to teach the Dharma to people who were deaf. But nowadays, it is possible, yeah. And also blindness, you can learn the Dharma even if you're blind and deaf. If your brain is damaged, that's another thing, yeah. Someone who's suffering from some brain injury or illness such that their brain isn't able to work properly, they're not able to use their cognitive abilities, that would be a difficult situation. But as long as our body is healthy enough and our brain is working well enough that we're able to understand the teachings, learn the teachings, and understand the teachings, then that's part of the precious human life. And we'll go into more of that later. But when it says in this verse, when it mentions strive to make good use of freedom and fortune, so freedom and fortune refers to the precious human life. We are free from certain disadvantageous situations that would make it very difficult for us to learn and practice the Dharma. And we have certain advantages. The word fortune refers to advantages that make it possible for us to learn the Dharma. Because, even a lot of people have, a good life. They're physically healthy, mentally healthy. They have enough to eat. They have a comfortable life, but they're not interested. Yeah, probably a lot of people we know, family members and friends and so on, who just have zero interest in any spiritual teachings, and they might think we're crazy, to be coming to a place like this and spending a weekend or 4 or 5 days learning about Buddhism and doing meditation. Why in the world would you want to do that? They just don't get it. So they don't have that inner desire to find spiritual teachers and learn spiritual teachings and engage in spiritual practice. So that's another factor in having a precious human life, is seeing the relevance, seeing the value in this kind of path and wanting to follow it. So the fact that we have that interest, it makes us fortunate. It's like Buddha's holding out these precious teachings, saying, here, they're free, come and get it. But if we say, no, thanks, I'm not interested, then we can't even take them in intellectually, much less make them part of our life. So that's why, it says, you fortunate ones, you're fortunate if you have all these conditions, outer and inner, to be in this situation where you can learn the Buddhist teachings and want to follow them, want to practice them. And then the last part says, without being attached to the joys of cyclic existence. So cyclic existence might be a new term for some of you. It's a translation of the term samsara, Sanskrit term. And samsara refers to the situation that we are in, as long as we are not enlightened and haven't attained nirvana or liberation. And the reason it's called cyclic existence is because we go in cycles, like a rat, what's that? The rat running around in the, what do they call that thing? Rat race, or that wheel, that little wheel. They keep running around and around, and they don't go anywhere. So cyclic existence is like that, in the sense that we are born, we go through our life, we come to the end of our life, we die, and then again we are born. We are born again. And again we go through another life, and then we die, and then we again are born, and it keeps going like that, again and again and again. Birth, life, death. And during our life, although we may have some pleasant experiences, we also have a lot of unpleasant ones, a lot of problems, a lot of suffering. And however well we take care of our bodies age, they're aging all the time, but we really start noticing it when we're in our 60s and 70s. Probably a lot of you know what I'm talking about. And then it gets worse and worse and worse, and then we die, and then we start all over again. And we keep doing this again and again and again, and never getting out. So it's a bit like being stuck on a Ferris wheel. It's fun the first time, or maybe the first 2 times or 3 times, but if you couldn't get off and it just keeps going around and around and around, it wouldn't be fun anymore, would it? You'd want to get out. Yeah, so that's the idea of cyclic existence. And this is actually the first of the 3 principal aspects of the path, is looking at cyclic existence and recognizing that it's unsatisfactory. It's not a good situation to be in. And I want to get myself out of this. I want to get off the Ferris wheel, off the merry-go-round, out of the rat race. And so what we have to do is stop being attached to cyclic existence, because that's what keeps us stuck, is we're attached. We're attached to the joys, the pleasures of cyclic existence, even though they're fleeting and dreamlike. They don't last, but we just can't get enough of them. Okay, so then we'll start the next verse. We may not get very far on it, but we'll at least start. This is starting to go into the first of the three principal aspects of the path. So this is for you embodied beings bound by the craving for existence, without the pure determination to be free, or renunciation, from the ocean of existence. There is no way for you to pacify the attractions to its pleasurable effects. Thus, from the outset, seek to generate the determination to be free. Okay, so this is introducing the first of the three principal aspects of the path, which is called renunciation, also called the determination to be free. It mentions here the third line, the ocean of existence. So samsara, there's different analogies used for samsara, and one of the analogies in the scriptures is like a huge ocean. Like if you think of, I think the Pacific Ocean must be the biggest ocean. It's huge. And in some parts it's terrible. You know, there's terrible storms, and there's also sharks, and yeah, really, you wouldn't want to be stuck out in the middle of the ocean all by yourself without anything, without even a lifesaver, right? Much less a boat. That would be awful, right? Like that movie Castaway. Did you ever see that one? That was terrible. Is that the name? Or Jaws. Yeah, Jaws. I didn't see that one, but I don't. Yeah, but that would not be a nice situation to be in, right? And so they say samsara is like that. It's like this huge ocean, and it's full of all kinds of problems and difficulties and dangers. And even if you're a good swimmer, right? Even if you're know how to swim and you're a good swimmer, but if you were out in the middle of the Pacific, how long would you last, right? It would be hard. And so that would not be a nice situation to be in. They also use the analogy of a prison, and I like that one. For me, that's quite a good one, because when you're in a prison, if you've ever been in a prison, even if you haven't, you can kind of imagine what it would be like. That's also an awful situation, right? Nobody wants their freedom taken away. Nobody wants to be locked up and not be able to go where you want and do what you want and meet your friends and your family and use your phone and watch whatever TV show you want. I mean, we like our freedom, right? And so a prison, you know, your freedom is taken away from you. You're under the control of other people. You're locked in to a cell when you don't want to be there, and so on. So it's a really awful, horrible situation. So for me, that's a really powerful analogy to samsara. So being in samsara is like that. You know, we're locked in. There's, you know, big walls and gates and bars and barbed wire and guards keeping us in this situation. Although samsara isn't imposed on us from the outside. It's not that anyone out there is keeping us stuck in samsara, but rather it's our own internal afflictions, our ignorance, our anger, our greed, our, you know, these afflictions in our mind, our karma, karmic imprints from our actions created in the past. So it's these internal factors in our mind that form the prison walls and bars and barbed wire and guards and so on, keeping us locked in. So it's, yeah, that, for me, that analogy really gives a sense of the oppressiveness of samsara and how, yeah, this is not a good situation. I shouldn't let myself remain in this situation. There is a way out. There is an escape route. The Buddha found it. And he's saying, come on, this way, get out. So why would you not want to follow? Although they do say people can sometimes get institutionalized in prison. Yeah, if they've been in their prison for so long, and then even if they have a chance to get out, they commit a crime and get back in. They don't know what to do with their freedom. But yeah, freedom from this situation is much, much better than remaining in the prison of samsara. And so the way to generate this determination to be free of samsara is to contemplate the unsatisfactoriness of samsara, the sufferings of samsara, the different problems that are experienced in samsara, so that we can see them very clearly. And then we'll see, yeah, this is not a good situation to be in. So we don't really have time now to go into those, but we'll do that in the afternoon. We'll go into the specific details of what's wrong with samsara, in case you haven't noticed. Okay. We have a few minutes left if anyone has a question, a burning question you'd like to ask. Dan?
Not so much a question as a comment, but I was thinking about the qualities in our mentors in terms of finding a qualified and bowing down like that. And you mentioned love and compassion, and those are really important qualities. Another thing I was thinking, though, there might be some times, like in my experience, where like our spiritual mentors might actually be a little bit stern or harsh, and we don't know their motivation. On the surface, it may seem harsh, but like in retrospect, oftentimes it was the right advice. And sometimes, if we're new, that could send people running. So I just that's just my experience, but I think it was really well the way you said it was, take our time and look at the qualities and like that. And the integrity part of it is huge too, and thank you for that.
Yeah, this is true. We shouldn't expect spiritual teachers to always be sweet and smiling and say what we want to hear and do what we want them to do. They can sometimes, but they say, yeah, if we really are sincere in our wish to change ourselves, to improve ourselves, we need to be willing to look at our faults and our mistakes. And sometimes we have a lot of resistance to that, We don't really want to acknowledge that we are making mistakes, we're doing things wrong, or that we have some faults. So, so that's part of the job of the spiritual teacher. And they're doing it out of compassion. They're doing it out of love and compassion for your own good. And there are stories, when you read stories about some of the famous gurus of the past, like Marpa, Milarepa. Milarepa is very famous, someone who was amazing in his practice, lived up in the caves in the Himalayas with nothing more than a piece of cotton around him, and attained enlightenment in that very lifetime. But his teacher, Marpa, was like, whoa, really. But they say Milarepa knew that he needed that because he'd done some bad stuff. He'd been involved in black magic and had killed people, and he came from kind of a bad place. And so Marpa's sternness towards him was to help him purify himself, and because Milarepa had incredible respect and devotion to Marpa and practiced according to his teachings, that's why he could reach enlightenment so quickly. So there are stories like that of gurus of the past, and even in the present, sometimes teachers can be, usually not like that, they don't sort of beat you physically, but they could be stern. And so we need to, like, part of the training here is be grateful for that kind of advice and listen, think about it. No, don't get into an argument and say, no, I'm not like that, I didn't do that. But think about what the teacher said. And yeah, if you disagree, I think you can go back and talk to them, or have a talk about it. Yeah, that's the purpose behind that kind of behavior that teachers will sometimes show. They're doing it out of kindness. Same with parents, Parents sometimes have to scold their kids, or teachers in school, If they were always sweet and smiling and nice, the kids would just be wild, wouldn't they? They'd be all over the place. The teachers sometimes have to raise their voices and look stern and talk in a stern way. But that's helpful for the kids to cool down. Okay, so let's stop there and dedicate.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Vajrasattva, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.